The Han Dynasty was one of the most significant dynasties in Chinese history, so much so that to this day, ethnic Chinese are still referred to as the Han people. It ruled for 400 years, from 202 BC to 220 AD, and was divided into two periods, the earlier Western Han Dynasty and the later Eastern Han Dynasty, with a brief break in between. The names come from the fact that the capital of the Western Han Dynasty was at Chang'an in the west, and that of the Eastern Han Dynasty was at Luoyang to the east of its counterpart. In this video, I will talk about the Western Han Dynasty and leave the Eastern Han Dynasty to another video. Several decades before the founding of the Han Dynasty, China was still divided into multiple states in the Warring States period. Many of these states had been independent for over half a millennium, and as such had their own cultures and institutions. The state of Qin, located in the west, grew increasingly powerful, and after more than a century of brutal warfare, conquered the other states to unify China in 221 BC. The king of Qin declared himself the first emperor of China and forcibly tried to bring this hodgepodge of states into one centralized power. His harsh policies led to a considerable amount of resentment, and after his death in 210 BC, massive rebellions broke out across China, leading to the overthrow of the Qin dynasty in 206 BC. A number of small states came into being in the chaotic aftermath, dominated by two states, Han to the west, where the former state of Qin used to be, and Chu to the east. The two sides fought a brief war known as the Chu-Han contention, and by 202 BC, China was again unified. The king of Han became Emperor Gaozu, the first emperor of the Han dynasty. At its inception, the Han dynasty was weak, with its very survival in doubt. Not only had China been devastated by the recent wars, but it was also heavily threatened by the newly ascendant Xiongnu, a confederation of nomadic tribes often referred to as the Huns in Western literature. To make matters worse, the emperor himself only had direct control over the western territories near the capital city of Chang'an. Large regions of China had been rewarded as fiefs to his most powerful generals, and their loyalties were highly questionable. Emperor Gaozu ruled for only 7 years but was able to stabilize the empire during his brief reign. After suffering an embarrassing defeat against the Xiongnu, he pragmatically made peace with them and paid tribute. Against his former generals, through a series of political maneuvering and open warfare, he removed all of them from power. By his death in 195 BC, the Han dynasty was divided into two halves, a western half under the direct control of the emperor, and an eastern half made up of many semi-independent states, now ruled directly by members of the imperial family who had the power to appoint officials, raise armies, and mint coins. For the 15 years after the death of Gaozu, political power was concentrated in the hands of his widow, the Dowager Empress Lü, and her immediate family members, to the point that they threatened to usurp the throne. Finally, government ministers and members of the imperial family overthrew the Lü family and massacred its members, and one of Gaozu's surviving sons was elected to be emperor. This was Emperor Wen, who ruled for 23 years until 157 BC, and widely considered to be one of the most benevolent rulers in Chinese history. Under his reign, peasants were taxed lightly, punishments for crimes were lessened, and the economy steadily grew. Nonetheless, tensions, including small-scale rebellions, frequently flared between the emperor and the ambitious local princes, although Emperor Wen skillfully kept their disruptions to a minimum. Emperor Wen was succeeded by his son, Emperor Jing, who ruled for 16 years until 141 BC. Early in his reign, in 154 BC, 7 eastern states rebelled. Although the rebels had a large army, it was easily outmaneuvered, and the rebellion was crushed in only several months. The princely states lost most of their privileges and were brought under the direct control of the emperor. The 40 years combined reigns of Emperors Wen and Jing is traditionally considered one of the greatest periods of peace and prosperity in Chinese history. This changed with the next emperor, Emperor Wu, who ruled for 50 years from 141 to 87 BC. At the beginning of his reign, the unequal peace between the Han and the Xiongnu had been ongoing for 60 years. Open warfare finally broke out in 133 BC, and over the next few decades, the Han dynasty launched various expeditions deep into Xiongnu territory and won multiple decisive victories. Han territory expanded northward to the steppes and northern Korea, and westward into the corridor linking eastern China with Central Asia. During these wars, emissaries were sent westward to travel through hostile territory in search of allies against the Xiongnu. They reached as far west as Transoxiana and brought back to China some of its first knowledge of the Middle East, India, and the Western world. With the Xiongnu defeated in battle, the Silk Road now opened up, connecting China through a series of trade routes all the way to the Mediterranean. The Han Dynasty also expanded aggressively to the south. After the fall of the Qin Dynasty, remnants of the Qin garrison in far southern China established an independent state called Nanyue, which was conquered in 113 BC, and Han rule extended southwards into modern-day northern Vietnam. The Han Dynasty subsequently conquered the mountainous modern-day Fujian province, permanently bringing it under Chinese rule, and also the mountain regions of what is now southwestern China, all the way to northern Myanmar. Domestically, Emperor Wu made a large number of reforms. To consolidate his rule, he abolished most of the remaining powers of the local princes, thus centralizing government power even more, and established 13 provinces to oversee the individual commanderies. He made Confucianism the predominant state philosophy, a position it would retain for the next 2,000 years, and established a system where local governors were responsible for nominating educated young men who demonstrated traditional Confucian virtues for government service. Economically, he oversaw the standardization of the coinage system and banned the private minting of coins, expansion of the government's salt and iron monopolies to increase tax revenue, construction of irrigation projects, and introduction of more advanced agricultural techniques. But despite all of these achievements, there was also a dark side to Emperor Wu's rule. The decades of near-constant warfare and his vast projects drained the empire of its resources, resulting in multiple peasant rebellions toward the end of his reign. He put his trust into unscrupulous ministers who terrorized the peasants and attacked their political rivals for personal gain. This culminated in 91 BC, when one of the emperor's favorite ministers accused the crown prince of witchcraft against the emperor. In desperation, the crown prince gathered his personal army and killed the minister, but was then himself suspected of treason. In the aftermath of the ensuing chaos and purges, tens of thousands of people were executed, many of whom were among the empire's elite. The crown prince committed suicide. His son was also killed, and only his grandson, who was just several months old at the time, was spared but forced to live his life as a commoner. After the death of Emperor Wu in 87 BC, his 8-year-old infant son became emperor as Emperor Zhao. He ruled for 13 years until 74 BC, mostly under the guidance of a powerful minister appointed as regent. The empire gradually recovered from all of Emperor Wu's excesses. Emperor Zhao died young without leaving an heir, and after some controversy over who would succeed the throne, it eventually went to the great-grandson of Emperor Wu, the baby we had mentioned earlier, who was now in his late teens and had lived virtually his whole life in poverty as a commoner. He was brought into the court and made emperor. This was Emperor Xuan, who ruled for 25 years until 48 BC. In part because of his difficult upbringing, he empathized with the plight of the common people and did all he could to make their lives easier by lowering taxes and closely supervising his appointed officials. He also resumed the wars against the Xiongnu, but focused on smaller expeditions, with greater emphasis put on breaking apart the Xiongnu Confederation from within. This culminated in the Xiongnu splitting into multiple factions, with each faction suing for their own peace and competing for the emperor's favor. The Tarim Basin, which had previously been under Xiongnu influence, became a protectorate of the Han Dynasty. Under Emperor Xuan, the Western Han Dynasty reached the height of its military and economic power. Unfortunately, his successor was Emperor Yuan, who can best be described as well-meaning but naive, and failed to control the government bureaucracy and local elites. He began to entrust the government to members of his wife's family, the Wang family. These in-laws, collectively known as the consort kins, would go on to play a major role in politics over the upcoming decades. The next emperor, Emperor Cheng, was an especially awful emperor who basically indulged himself to death, and today he's best remembered for having one of the most famous concubines in Chinese history. Corruption worsened, and more the local elites forced peasants off their lands. The power of the Wang family grew exponentially, including that of a young rising star named Mang, a highly educated Confucian scholar, well-liked for his humility and concern for the poor. The succeeding emperor, Emperor Ai, ruled for only 6 years until 1 BC. Ai means lamentable, which gives you an idea of the chaotic state of affairs at the time. He was the most famously homosexual emperor in Chinese history. He had a lover named Dongxian, and one day, while they were sleeping together, he woke up and tried to get out of bed, only to realize that he couldn't leave because Dongxian was sleeping on top of his sleeve. Not wanting to wake up Dongxian, he simply cut off his sleeve, and from then on the phrase cut sleeve became synonymous with homosexuality in Chinese. Emperor Ai did not leave behind a male heir, and so the same dowager empress for the past two emperors, together with Wang Mang, selected an 8-year-old who was easy to control to succeed the throne. But as the emperor grew older, tensions mounted between the emperor and Wang Mang, who was now shedding his carefully crafted disguise and exposing his true ambition and treachery. Wang Mang had the teenage emperor poisoned and installed a 2-year-old toddler as the new emperor. But this was still not enough for him, and in 9 AD, he usurped the throne, replacing the Han Dynasty with the Xin Dynasty. A great deal of change took place in China during the 200 years we have covered so far. At the beginning of the dynasty, people from many parts of China still largely identify with their local states, such as Qin, Qi, or Chu. But after 200 years of peaceful rule, a more shared identity, the Han identity, emerged. The population expanded, growing from an estimated 15 million in 200 BC to a recorded 59 million in the census of 2 AD, with the most densely populated area in the north, around the capital at Chang'an and along the banks of the lower Yellow River. Externally, the empire had overcome the threat from the Xiongnu, expanded its borders, and opened up trade with the outside world. China also became much more centralized during this time. The early Han Dynasty was a hybrid between a feudal and centralized state, but as the princes lost their power, that of the central government grew. But due to the size of the empire, it was always going to be difficult for the emperor to maintain firm control with only a few centrally appointed bureaucrats. As the empire matured and wealth began accumulating at the top, the power of the local elites, such as members of the imperial family, relatives of government officials, and merchants, also grew. Their powers were held in check by assertive emperors such as Emperor Wu and Emperor Xuan, but the succession of weak emperors after Emperor Xuan meant that the local elites were able to expand their wealth and influence with little repercussion, forcing peasants into becoming tenants, slaves, or vagrants. When Wang Mang first took power, the general sentiment among the empire was that the Han Dynasty had run its course, and there was high hope for a new start. Unfortunately, Wang Mang instituted a series of poorly thought-out reforms with catastrophic consequences. Because of his background as a Confucian scholar, he tried to restore China to an idealistic past, one that was incompatible with the realities of his time. He made all lands public, based on an economic system that was in place 1,000 years prior. He also made it illegal to buy and sell slaves, angering the elites, and repeatedly introduced new coinages, leading to financial instability. When he got pushback for his reforms, he passed harsh and arbitrary laws, further alienating the people. The chaos made the government dysfunctional, important positions were often unfilled, and floods and famine became common. Finally, rebellions broke out, leading to the fall of Wang Mang and the re-establishment of the Han Dynasty, although that story will be for another video. If you've enjoyed this video, please remember to hit like and subscribe below. Please also feel free to leave in the comments any topics that you would like me to discuss in more detail in further videos.